Hello everyone, and on behalf of the National Park Service, welcome to Hamilton Grange National Memorial. My name is Ranger Justin, and today I am presenting a virtual program called Alexander Hamilton's Sweet Project. It's about the history of Hamilton's country home located in Hamilton Heights in New York City. In 1798, Hamilton wrote his wife Eliza and hinted to the purchasing of property that would eventually lead to the construction of his country home. He referred to it as his sweet project, but little did he know or could ever realize at the time that this sweet project would be adopted by generations of people who have time and time again decided to preserve the building. And just like its owner Hamilton, this home has worn many hats in its lifetime. It was a private residence, it was a church, it was a museum, and finally a national memorial. Now, before we get into all of that history, I'm going to say a couple words about the National Park Service and Manhattan sites. Now, the National Park Service preserves unimpaired the natural and cultural resources of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. Now, Hamilton Grange National Memorial, we are, of course, a part of the National Park Service, and we are also a part of Manhattan sites. We are actually 1 in 9 sites in Manhattan. So after this program, you have plenty of content to explore. Now, with all that said, let's head to the first stop at the entrance hall. Welcome to the entrance hall at the Grange. Hamilton called his country home the Grange after his ancestral home in Scotland. As for Hamilton, he lived here from 1802 until his untimely death in a duel in 1804. His wife Eliza, however, continued living here for 30 years after his passing. She actually lived a nice long life, well into her 90s, and after living in New York for several decades, she sold the home in 1833 and eventually moved to Washington, D.C. You may wonder, why did Hamilton decide on building a country home in the first place? Well, there's a couple reasons. He wanted to escape the summer heat in downtown New York City, and perhaps more importantly, he wanted to escape the yellow fever epidemics that were going on at the time. Being able to do that at a country home like this was a mark of his social status. In 1801, he hired an up-and-coming architect named John McComb Jr. to design the home. Today, you may know McComb from such buildings as New York City Hall and Gracie Mansion, where the mayor lives. McComb was a federal-style architect, and his work at the Grange is a rare example of his domestic architecture. The federal style was prominent in the 1780s into the circa 1840s in the United States and Britain. It's been closely associated with the early years of the United States government. However, it was created by a British architect who was heavily influenced by archaeological digs in Rome. Altogether, the federal style is an alternative to Georgian style, which, by the way, was named after the British monarchy, and it reflects themes of balance and symmetry. Overall, there is less decoration in the federal style than you would see, say, in the Georgian style. Today, the Grange serves as a tangible connection to all of this history. It's lived many lives since the Hamilton's ownership. It was a private residence, a church, a public museum, and finally, a national memorial. And it was moved twice, once in 1889 and the second time in 2008. In the year 1889, the front and rear porches were removed from the building. It was raised off its foundation and driven by horses to its new location. Over the years, different buildings were constructed around the Grange. The first one was St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and the second was an apartment building. So for many years, the Grange was sandwiched in between two buildings until it was finally moved again in the year 2008. Let's go visit its second location and talk more about this chapter in the Grange's history. I'm currently standing at 141st Street and Convent Avenue next to St. Luke's Episcopal Church. In the year 1889, the Grange was moved from its original location near modern-day 143rd Street to this spot. When Hamilton first came to this part of Harlem, it was the countryside, so think of woods, fields, and streams. Hamilton purchased over 30 acres of this land from a man named Jacob Shefflin, and he hired architect John McComb Jr. to design the home. Later, Ezra Weeks, a contractor, was brought on the project, and they began construction of the home on top of a hill. It was a wooded area, and it was watered by 2 streams. The 200-foot elevation offered Hamilton views of the Hudson River on the west and the Harlem and East Rivers on the east. His wife, Eliza, she monitored the progress of the home as well as the grounds and gardens. Her father, Philip Schuyler, offered building materials such as lumber and offered building suggestions. When Hamilton died in 1804, his friends and colleagues made a secret fund that enabled Eliza to keep the home for another 30 years. She decided to sell it in the year 1833, and after that point, it changed hands through a series of owners. At the same time, the city was changing, and the Grange may have been demolished if it wasn't for the efforts of a real estate developer. You see, the Manhattan street grid was being implemented throughout New York around this time, and in the year 1889, this real estate developer purchased the Grange and moved it. The congregation was building a new church, that's the church that I'm beside right now, and they used the Grange for church services. It stayed like this for quite a while. In 1924, the American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society purchased the home and turned it into a museum. Furniture and decorative objects associated with the family were put on display. In 1962, the Grange came to the ownership of the National Park Service under the condition that it would be moved to a more suitable location where the building could be fully restored. Let's return to the Grange and talk about its move in 2008. Okay, I'm now at the Grange at its 3rd and final location at St. Nicholas Park. In view behind my shoulder here is St. Luke's Episcopal Church. How did we get here? In 2008, the National Park Service hired Wolf House movers to physically move this historic structure to its current location. They raised it 30 feet in the air to clear a portion of the church, and then they rolled the building down several hundred feet on steel beams and lowered it with a unified jacking hydraulic system on a set of giant dollies that were pushed using a remote control to its current location. This began a lengthy restoration process, and the site was reopened to the public in 2011. Now, the National Park Service interprets and cares for this site because of what Alexander Hamilton did in his lifetime. But it's a public space because we choose to use it. And I encourage all of you to find your own meaningful connections, either virtually or in person. Thank you.